And we're recording.
All
Okay,
right.
cool. So we're going to do a question and answer episode again.
We
I
are.
think,
But firstly, Luke, how are you?
yeah, I'm not too bad. I've obviously, as you know, spent a long time doing that monotonous like editing of the exercise library. So I feel good that that's kind of come to an end.
You are our hero for doing that. Okay. Right. Let's go in.
Yeah, let's
And
roll with them.
to obviously stick with tradition, our first question is on protein.
All that protein.
Oh God, we love it.
Oh.
However, there aren't too many. So, what are good sources of protein for veggies and vegans?
You're probably going to have some better answers to this than me. Because you work with a couple of veggies and vegans.
Yeah.
They tend to not like me.
I don't. Well, when you post about steak all the time, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so I would go with, if you are vegetarian, some great sources obviously include things like eggs, whey, dairy, things like cottage cheese, quark, which is like a type of soft cheese, things like that, because they're all great complete sources of protein. If you are a vegan, you're probably going to be looking at more things like tofu, corn, seitan, beans, pulses, stuff like that. But what you've got to remember is that a lot of those plant-based sources of protein will not be what we call complete proteins. So they will not have the right amount of all 9 essential amino acids. So you may have to pair some of those items together, at least at some point throughout your day. I think we had a question like this before, because I remember saying beans on toast. So baked beans matched with like a whole grain toast will give you a complete source of protein. But a lot of the like the fake meat products, and there are apparently some good ones. So I guess it depends why you might be a vegan. So I have a client who's a vegan, and she uses a lot of like substitutes, like fake chicken, stuff like that. Whereas I know for some people, they don't actually like that some of those products are made to look like meat. So, and to them, it's like, if meat's the issue rather than more like animal welfare or the environment, I think it can be a bit different. But yeah, those would be my main things.
Yeah, I think some great examples there, and putting the emphasis on to pairing those protein sources as well, trying to get a nice kind of diversity within your diet. Just to kind of take it a little bit further, obviously I am dating not a vegan, but someone who is dairy intolerant. So
ages I thought Sarah was a vegan, and then when she chicken, I'd be like, is she all right?
We do have some great fun, like when we go out for food. And there was this one time we went for pancakes, and she ordered the vegan pancake but with bacon. The waiter was so confused, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. But getting a good vegan protein powder as well is something that can really help in the diet, because a lot of vegans, vegetarians struggle to increase their protein intake without increasing their carbohydrates or fat sources through a lot of kind of dietary sources, like obviously like grains, pulses and things like that have higher content of carbohydrates. So some good ones are awesome supplements, especially the salted caramel chocolate or something. That's a very good one. That's quite thick, chocolatey and heavy. There's another one she's tried, I think it was like bulk powder one, the vegan one from there. It was very sort of on the contrast of like very kind of thin and didn't really taste of much at all. So it depends what you're kind of after. But most of the vegan proteins do have some kind of grainy taste, but it's trying to kind of get rid of that as much as possible. But I do like the vegan awesome supplements one. I will now and again steal it for oats. It goes well in oats. Better than whey actually, but it's normally, if I've run out of whey, I'll be like, I'll have a little bit of that.
I love it. Okay, perfect. Right, question number 2. How does achieving 10 to 12,000 steps a day benefit people?
So
Wanna go first?
yeah, I've probably got 2 main kind of benefits in my mind that come to me first off. One would be because generally today, like not today specifically, but like today is in this
Statistically,
kind of
the 30th of
yeah.
April.
But people are quite sedentary and don't really move much at all, and a lot of us are kind of like office based and not well, or a lot of our work now is sitting at a laptop, so we don't really move as much, and then we sit at a laptop working all day, and then we get home and then we're like, oh well, I'm just going to sit and watch some TV. So we're not really getting, one, sort of much exercise, but 2, any sort of light exposure, fresh air, and the sort of the mental clarity of just being able to go out and detach from all like the your daily sort of life. And it's a good chance to have a kind of nice kind of mindfulness task of just walking and thinking, or listening to a podcast, doing some learning, whatever it is. So those are kind of my 2 biggest benefits, I'd say.
Yep, agree. And then in terms of, obviously, like 10,000 is quite an arbitrary number, but it's one that a lot of people within the fitness space like to use as a marker. Essentially, the reason that's come about is it takes you about an hour and 40 minutes to do 10,000 steps if you try to do it all in one go. So obviously, like Luke said, it's a good stretch of time outside, moving, not sitting on your bum. But also in terms of if you're trying to maybe lose some weight, and you don't necessarily want to strip back your calorie intake, you're essentially just burning more calories by making yourself get out and move. So the reason us as coaches will often set step targets is basically to get you out and move. The numbers we set aren't necessarily magic numbers, but if somebody comes to us and they're doing, I don't know, say 4,000 to 5,000 steps daily, if we can get them up to around 8,000, we've almost doubled that, which means they're going to naturally be burning more calories, and therefore their weight loss goals will be easier to achieve than solely by stripping back food.
Yeah, I think, don't hold me to this, but I think in sort of the research and general kind of public guidelines, they say between like 4 and 6 shows benefits of combating like metabolic syndrome, metabolic disease. So that's where the public kind of guidelines came from, like 8 to 10,000 steps per day. And obviously then fitness professionals, we're like, we'll go for the top end of that. So 10,000 is the target. But I think that's where I say, like, it depends on the individual and what they're kind of doing generally anyway. Because, for example, if we've got someone that is a laborer, they're going to be getting a hell of a lot of exercise and daily steps anyway. So like, we're not going to then be like, oh yeah, you need to track your steps, because I'm like, boy, you're just walking all day, so don't worry about that. That's one thing we can kind of tick off that you don't need to track, because I'm pretty sure you're going to be getting it anyway. And it's hard general daily work. So let's just focus on like removing that as a limiting factor and focus on like your resistance training.
Beautiful. Okay, juicy one here, Luke.
Ooh.
And this is from my client Sam, who is, honestly, she is the best person. Whenever I say that we're doing a Q&A podcast, she gives me like 8 questions. So her question is, would you ever consider competing? And I can't remember, did we touch on this in the last one?
I'm not sure if it was the last one, but
one of them.
Very loosely. So who is this directed at, me or you, or just generally?
Both. I think it's nosiness.
Nosiness.
So my answer is a really, really swift no. Well, consider, have done, thought about it very briefly, joked about it a lot, and then decided actually I couldn't afford to anyway, and I have no interest in starving myself to become an incredibly small human, to stand on a stage and have a load of people I don't know decide whether or not I deserve a placing. And also a lot of competing relies on symmetry. When you have one arm shorter than the other, I basically feel like I would just be like, I'd come last, because they'd be like, there is absolutely no symmetry on that girl, because absolutely none of my body is the same. So it's a no from
Yeah. Everyone that's listening, Harriet walks around like she's got swagger, but she's just walking normally. But she's just like dropping one shoulder.
Little arm. But yes, I do.
Yeah. I think we might have actually talked about this before the last podcast, so it wasn't actually in it.
Oh, maybe.
But yeah, so I kind of grew up wanting to, and very sort of focused on that sort of what I wanted to do. And the older I've got, the sort of less that interest has kind of really appealed to me. And it's more the fact of around, like you say, getting on the stage and just kind of being judged in something that is very much an objective sport. It's not like you lifted the weight or you didn't. It's very much if your body type, the symmetry appeals to the judges. And even sort of from my experience, it comes down to sometimes of like, oh, you trained and were coached by this person, your posing practice was with this person, so that's going to put you higher in this federation. I'm like, I can't be dealing with that bullshit, and that like incestuous nature of like dealing with each other. So I'm more sort of gravitating towards the fact of doing a lot more sort of like just photo shoots and getting lean through sort of different phases, and just improving my physique and my body composition to just what I want to at that kind of time, and setting sort of my own goals, not necessarily having to wear some little pants on stage.
And they are rank for the boys.
I mean, I
don't love the bikinis. But
no,
yeah,
and they're expensive.
Lineup as well, doesn't it? Like it depends who is in your category and who you're up against. And that to me is like a firm.
Yeah,
my self-esteem wouldn't be able to hack it.
I mean, I wouldn't rule it out completely for me, because I may get that kind of urge to do it once at some point, but at this kind of current time, I'm not really considering it. I'm just gonna keep pushing Rob and making sure he keeps doing it. And he can be the front man.
For anyone that hasn't seen Rob, A, go and follow him, and B, he is our resident competitor, and he looks, I mean, it's a pretty severe look he's got going on. I'm just really concerned for Rob because he goes so red when he lifts, and obviously he lifts such a lot of weight. Every time he posts a video, I'm like, your brain is going to explode. I find it quite concerning.
Wait till I start lifting heavy again. I burst all the blood vessels in my face once.
Oh no. You've got there's a prominent vein on your forehead, and I bet he comes right out when you lift.
Oh yeah.
Okay, can't wait to see that. Right, okay. A bit of a longer one to answer now. So, and this is again probably a little bit more of our personal opinion. So, and I've had to try and word this, and because this is from one of my clients, and we've had chats about this before. If a housemate, perhaps that you live with, or a friend is feeling a little bit triggered by you dieting and like the process of you weighing out your food or tracking your food, how would you advise somebody to balance being like empathetic to the way they feel while still staying on your kind of in your lane and very committed to your own goals? Because some people don't understand tracking, and they think their natural kind of view on it or their experiences of it is that it's very restrictive, or that dieting in general, it can be quite triggering for a lot of people for various reasons. But say you were living with somebody and in their attitude towards you dieting was quite negative, how would you deal with that?
That's a really interesting question, actually.
Thanks, Beth.
I think there's a couple of ways you can approach it. One would be to try and understand why it's actually triggering them. Is there, because you don't necessarily know what their past is or what their opinions are. They just fairly uneducated about that that side of things, in the fact they don't really understand what calories and macronutrients are and how they impact our body composition. So it may be a fact of they might be willing to learn and educate and be open to sort of progressing their knowledge as well. It's just a lack of understanding that they're being kind of triggered by that. Or is there some, well, not like past trauma, but have they have sort of disassociated sort of eating patterns in the past, or a poor relationship with food? Do they have their own health battles that they're trying to combat? That would be sort of where my mind goes straight off, trying to kind of understand what their position is at this time, and that will indicate where you can kind of go forwards. On another kind of separate note, in terms of things that you could do, you could, and it's not necessarily just for them, but in ease of making life simpler for yourself, try, as you have a better understanding of tracking and of food portions, there's things that you can do so you don't have to necessarily, for example, weigh that portion out every time. So pre-designated portions. For example, like if you're having a bag of microwavable rice, that you're having like half of that, or prepping meals, for example, you might be able to do that at a certain time. They might be off shopping, so they don't see a lot of this, and then you're just grabbing the meal out and eating it, so they don't necessarily see that kind of process behind what you're doing. Or like when you're having tubs of yogurt or something, you might be having the whole tub or half a tub, whole tub club. If you're having that's really for the ice cream, but we'll go with Greek yogurt.
Never heard of anybody accidentally eating a 500-gram tub of yogurt, I'll be honest.
I do it on purpose. Like protein sitting there.
Yeah.
But yeah, those kind of pre-designed and pre-designated portion control might be ways that you can kind of change some of your diet plan, in a sense, to make things easier. What are some of your thoughts?
Okay, so
I think you've got a lot on this.
I have quite a lot, and there's so this came up a few weeks ago, and this was originally genuinely a client question, and I also asked both Emma and Amelia for their input. The perks of being an EIQ student is basically got access to their brains, which is fantastic. And because Amelia, for example, comes from, and Emma too, but comes from a very kind of compassionate coaching place, what I found was really interesting was that they kind of said the same thing, in that from your perspective as the person who is potentially triggering somebody else, maybe check with yourself. Are you maybe talking about your dieting endeavors too much? Do you sound a little bit obsessive? Do you actually, if you check yourself, go, or maybe I do talk about this too much? And I think sometimes that can come from an excitement point of view. So the client that asked the question in particular has done phenomenally well. She has both a brilliant physical and, most importantly, mental transformation over the last 12 weeks. And it wasn't planned as 12 weeks, but that was how we ran her first diet phase. So her changes have been mega, but she's thrown herself into it. Basically, she got all her ducks in a row. So she's naturally very excited by that, and I think wants to share it. And I think there are potentially some issues in the background for her housemate, and they have since had a little bit of a chat about that. But kind of the most important thing that I took away from speaking to Emma and Amelia was that actually you're not responsible for how somebody else feels. And as long as really you're not being obsessive, ramming it down their throats, if they don't want to see you weigh your food, it's on them to leave the kitchen. Like in a shared space,
Yeah.
It's not for you to feel like you can't be comfortable in doing what you want to do. And the client in particular has a very healthy relationship. It wasn't an obsessive way in. She just basically wanted to nail it and wanted to get herself to a certain place. And we've done that. And we're now kind of working, we're now up to maintenance. We are removing some elements of tracking. So yes, naturally the kind of the perceived, I don't know, like not obsession with tracking, but it will become less obvious as she moves away and feels more confident in her own more intuitive eating style. But I think one of my favorite bits was, well, if they're triggered, then that's on them, and it's on them to do the work themselves, not for you to always try and bend for somebody else. And if they don't want to do that inner work because of whatever reason, that's kind of on them, and you can only do so much. So exactly all those things you said in terms of like being more aware, yet maybe like dishing up food for a couple of days, stick it in a Tupperware so you can eat and go. But past a certain point, crack on.
There's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
I think it's harder being in the situation of where it's a shared space and not in terms of like a family, because sometimes if we're going through any like pre-design for like a prep, taking someone to a bodybuilding prep, or a quite intense sort of fat loss phase or something, or someone that's very new to things, that they're a bit worried about their other half, we will sort of guide them to try and talk to them and be sort of open before they sort of go into this process, to make sure that they're kind of included in what's going to happen. They can provide support and help, and they understand why we're doing these certain things. Like another example, like again with Rob, like before he went into his last prep, which was his first bodybuilding meet, his other half, like gotten to like sit down and talk about it and make sure that we knew sort of what was happening, and she got involved and like started helping him like calculate like some of his meals and things like that, and just knowing that she was on the same sort of wavelength as him, and that it was a pre-designated time frame that could put everything into it. It helped release some of that stress, opposed to being like halfway into prep and finding that there's that stress that all kind of bubbles up and comes out in the middle of it, and be like, why are you doing this, why are you doing that? We've tackled those issues beforehand. But in this sort of situation where it's a shared space and it's a friend, not someone that you're in a relationship with, it becomes harder, because I say you don't necessarily have that understanding beforehand to be able to talk through things. And I think you're right as well, like there is only so much you can put into helping other people. At the end of the day, you've got to focus on yourself to a large degree. Yeah.
Absolutely. But communication in all aspects is definitely helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. So next question, another long one. How do you go about managing your own needs when perhaps your environment changes? And this is quite specific in this client lives away from home, but has come home for around a month and has found that while she's been away, there's been quite a physical transformation, mental growth, mental clarity. She's come back in a really strong mindset, but has found old habits kind of creeping in, and maybe people in the home environment aren't necessarily, because they've not watched the last few months, they're very kind of treating her how she used to be, or thinking that nothing's changed. So how would you go around like managing your own needs in that sense, and like trying not to fall back into old habits?
I think one of the hardest things at that point is in that situation as well, like not realizing and not knowing. So you're kind of at that point where you're getting into it and you're like, okay, you've realized that, which is the first like big barrier, and now it's trying to break that down, because going forwards in the future, you know that, okay, when you come home for a couple of months, there's going to be these issues. So you can, again, like put kind of contingency plan in place ahead of time and be like, okay, this is what barriers I faced last time, this is the stuff I struggled with, how can I make sure I'm improving going forwards. But trying to understand what things are potentially triggering you to fall into those bad habits. Is it like certain emotions, certain feelings, conversations, or just that environment you're being in? Really, my biggest bit of advice would just be try and just note things down. Just look at what, at this point, what issues you are facing, what are the bad habits, and what have you learned over these last couple of weeks, couple of months, that you've sort of fallen into good habits of, and what things could you do to change those? And they're going to be very specific on each of those tasks. For example, it might be trying to pick like a random habit falling back on.
Let's say struggling to get steps in, like just falling out the habit of going for a walk. It's something they did when they were at home.
Yeah, so at home you might have sort of started to get a good amount of steps in through the day, and it didn't feel like you're necessarily having an issue to get them. Going back home, be like, okay, I'm going to set a designated time to go out for a walk. And that's going to get me to hit my steps. It might be first thing in the morning, get up, go for a walk, get back, and then doesn't matter what else happens through that day, you've already got your steps in, or the majority of them. And that can be your like new temporary habit that combats that issue.
Agree. I think my advice to the person in question was very similar. And as well, focus on what you can control. So if, say, moving back home for a bit means that your mum cooks all your meals again, sit down, have that conversation, explain that you're trying to prioritize, lean protein, fruits and vegetables, but maybe leave yourself, a buffer in your calories. So maybe in your first meals of the day, you reserve a little bit of carbs, reserve a little bit of fats, maybe pull back on what you might have been having before, allow some extra calories for your evening meal, so that even if you can't track it, you can know roughly, right, I'm within my calorie balance for the day. And one of my biggest things always is don't rely on anybody else to take you for a walk. So get up and prioritize it in your own time, or be firm with telling people what your plans are. Don't feel like you always have to bend to everybody else. You might want to be like, right, it's Saturday. Just to let you know that I'm going to get up, I'm going to go for a walk between 8 and 9, but after that, I'm cool. Like, we'll do whatever for the rest of the day. Or I'm going to get up and go and train early. Like, yeah,
at the end of the day, you are an adult and you have control over your time and what you do. Like, there's going to be some situations where you don't have that specific control. Like, you might not be able to, you might not drive, and so you can't go to a gym because where you normally are, you can walk around the corner to the gym. So that might be out of your control. You might be able to get someone to drop you, but there's going to be certain situations where it doesn't work. But it's just a case of, okay, like, assess the situation beforehand, put in a plan, and be an adult and just do it.
Hashtag be an adult. Okie dokie. So next question. Obviously everybody is different, but is there a fairly standard length that a diet phase should be?
No.
There's I love that both of our faces went no.
There's no standard length. Like, you can theoretically, you could start dropping fat over like a couple of days and then be in a surplus for a couple of days and then in a deficit for a couple of days and then maintenance. And over 10 years, you will lose body fat, but it's not going to be, it's going to take you 10 years. Like, no one wants that. It will take you a minimum couple of weeks to start to see some results and to build up enough of a deficit to start like utilizing body fat and your stores of body fat, and to have enough of that fat loss to make visual changes. And then on the other end of the spectrum, from experience, once you start to kind of get beyond like 10 weeks of like a fairly in like a fairly aggressive diet, that's going to be an effective diet, it's more the fact of the psychological effects start to creep in, physical like tiredness, and you just get sort of very drained. So it's probably going to be a fact of, if you don't end it soon, like you're more likely to start to slip up on things, more likely to overeat, not be in a deficit, and then end up just kind of spinning your wheels. So like, and I think that's typically where a lot of people come from, this sort of 12-week number, because it fits nicely. It's a good time frame. It's like a quarter of a year. It's like divisible by like 4 weeks, and it's just like a nice round number.
Yeah.
But you can go for fat loss phases that are 20 weeks, 24 weeks, 30 weeks, but it's just grueling, and that's the majority of a year. Like, when you're in a fat loss period for a long time, you got to remember that you're down regulating a lot of the systems of the body, and that's not going to be good long term. But there is I can think of one study off the top of my head that the guy was, I think he fasted for like a year, and he lost a hell of a lot of body weight.
Yeah.
And he's like, he's obviously fine,
yeah,
but it's just, who the hell wants to not eat for a year? Like, nobody wants to be in a diet for that long. It's just not fun. So it's balancing that length of time that it's aggressive enough to make substantial changes and you get enough of change that you want, but not being reserved and slow and easy that it just drags out. So it's, you got to remember, like, you can do phases of fat loss. Like, go in, get a period of set time in a more aggressive fat loss phase, then come out of it, bring your calories up to maintenance, let some of the systems of body reset, resensitize, have a little bit of a break. Don't go like into a major surplus and have those like major fluctuations. Just back to maintenance, let everything reset again, and then go into another fat loss phase. And you can have that broken up over a longer duration.
Yeah.
But short answer, no, there's no like specific kind of ideal time frame.
Agree. My first diet phase was about 24 weeks and it was disgusting. And I spent a lot of that time, exactly as you said, spinning my wheels. It was horrific. Yeah. In hindsight, I should have just done the training plan, tried to find out my maintenance, but I went in with the goal of, yeah, coach, I want to lose fat. And I was absolutely not ready to commit to the behaviors I needed. My weekends were still a bit OTT, still eating out too much, didn't explain, to my other half that, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing. So I just learned absolutely nothing in terms of balancing any of it. I like to do 8 to 12 or 12 to 16 weeks at a push. Again, it depends on the client, it depends on their time frame, and it depends on their goal. But you're right, 8 to 12 is quite a sweet spot if somebody's got their ducks in a row. Because if you're not going into it with either the right attitude or the mental clarity that it is going to get a little bit tough, that will make even 8 weeks feel horrific. But I wouldn't say there is any point in doing much less than 8 weeks, because the minute you start to see changes, you then pull yourself back up to maintenance. The scales don't sit where your new low weight was. They'll bounce around a bit, and that can be a little bit of a head fuck.
It does matter a little bit on what your end goal is as well, because if it's just kind of general fat loss just to look and feel more confident and have some positive body composition changes, then you've got a little bit of leeway that you can, if things are going, like, you can still, like, if you're 8 weeks in and things are still pretty good, you don't, like, you're making good progress, you're not feeling like major diet fatigue, and you think you could probably eke out another 2-3 weeks, you could add that on. If you're getting to that point and like, oh shit, I'm just like, I want to stick my head into a bag of Doritos like now, then then it's probably going to be a bit of a different. But if you've got a, for example, like a specific date, like a show, a photo shoot, anything, then you're going to work back from that, and you're going to want to be in like the best condition you can for that.
Wow, that's a grown-up ringtone. Wow, I like that.
Yeah,
But
so if you've got a specific date that you need to work to, like, you're going to work back from that, and you've not got that wiggle room. So you'd probably want to give yourself a little bit more time to be able to counter anything that fucks up, basically.
I like it. Okay.
One more question, I think.
Last question. These have all been good. These have been quite long ones today, which I've enjoyed.
These have been good.
Okay, so nice ending, actually. How do I know when to have a deload week, and are they always a week long?
Okay, cool. Yeah, so first off, let's go for the end bit. Are they always a week long? Not necessarily. All you're looking for is for fatigue to drop. That could take a couple of days. It could just be a week. So then you're rotating back into your normal sort of weekly training program. But if your sessions might have run over towards the end of it, and you take then a couple of days off and go into a new training program once everything has subsided, and like general fatigue, systemic fatigue has all settled, you're feeling good, you're ready to push back into the next training session, then you're good to go. It just typically works that most people work on like a weekly structure, like they go to work Monday to Friday and then have their weekends. They're programming for the gym, they have like set days that they can go to the gym, so it's easiest just to okay, this week long is going to be a deload, reduce your training volume, and then move on. Kind of started to cover like why do we need deload there, but let's say to reduce that fatigue and allow us to recover from the previous kind of couple of weeks that we've been accumulating fatigue, accumulating progressive overload, and taxing our central nervous system, taxing our physical musculature, and causing stress to our bodies. So we're letting all of that settle, letting ourselves be in a position where we can recover and actually go into another training phase that's going to be productive, and not just keep pushing. Because it's the amount of times I've had a client where we've gotten to that sort of point where they're like going to need that sort of deload week. You can start to see them, like their numbers are like at that point where you can tell that they need the deload, and then they've gone, oh, I'm going to push one more week, and you're like, oh, okay, well, sometimes you need a bit of a lesson. So I'm like, okay, see how you go. But first session into that week, they're like, no, I'm done. I can't. The numbers dropped. I couldn't complete the session and worked into deload. And sometimes it takes that sort of little bit of pushing too far to know that, okay, that's my point where I need to work towards. Because you'll see it, your numbers will start to drop off, and you'll see that you're not causing overload. You'll find that your bar speed will start to slow down as well, execution, and just general fatigue through the sessions. You'll get to the end of the session and feel like you're absolutely beat up and you just want to sleep. And that's all it is. Like, periodization in the sense of like the actual word came from like the sporting management, like side of things like strength and conditioning, where we're sort of breaking up our training programs into specific phases to lead into competitions, whether that's from like the Olympics, where you could have 4-year long periodized training plans that are, you have your macrocycle, microcycle, mesocycles that lead into that over the 4 years for the Olympics, or you have like your seasonal sports of like rugby, football, that you'll have your off season, like your in season, that facilitate your programming for that. All we're really doing with periodization for our training and sort of general public is to manage that fatigue, stress, and overload to enable us to progress further and make as good a progress as we can. And that's where it can be a bit more flexible, because we don't have to be ready for like certain dates to be at a peak performance. It's just like, okay, we're just managing our fatigue and looking to make progress in the gym and in our bodies and feel good. So if you've got a holiday coming up next week and you've already done like your 4 or 5 weeks of training, tie your deload in with your holiday, because like you don't have to train when you're away on holiday and you can just enjoy that. But if you have like bigger goals, then you might, but most people don't. So
Yep.
It's just a way of managing your training.
Beautiful. I have nothing to add other than you'll know at the point where you really start learning how to push yourself, you will just know, because week 5, week 6 will come around and you will be dying for the reduction in volume. Whereas in your first couple of mesocycles, especially if it's the first time you've ever run a periodized training program, you will not feel like you need it. You'll be questioning your coach, going, I could do more. But trust us when we say we'd much rather deload you slightly ahead rather than watch you burn out. We have to do one more question, because I got very triggered and wrote a post on it this week. So there is just one more.
Okay.
And so the question is how to diet when nobody around you is supportive, yet they're critical when you don't achieve. And a few people laughed at me because I went straight in with a post that was like, your body is your prerogative and nobody else's. So basically, Brutal Harriet says 2 fingers up to people, because it actually doesn't matter what you do. And you cannot always please everybody. Your family, your friends will always, rightly or wrongly, have a judgment on what you're doing or what you're not doing. And the minute you tell anybody that your goal is fat loss, they really love to go in on, but you're perfect the way you are. You don't need to diet. Why do you want to do that? Or even when you say, I'm going to join a gym, they're like, but why do you need to why do you need to join a gym? Because the gym and dieting is synonymous with lean, veiny bodybuilders. But actually, exercise for health, being aware of what you put in your mouth that sounded rude, are great things.
Always be aware, Harriet. Always be aware.
Always be aware of what's going in your mouth, ladies and gentlemen. Keep it closed most of the time. But, but being aware of your protein, your fruit and veg intake, in the main, that's actually a really healthy way to live, because we've developed a nation of people, or a world of people, where we now think it's acceptable to eat out multiple times a week and to not really have any fruits or vegetables, and to just be running below par, but think that, it's all right, or deal with, injuries, niggles that might come from being overweight or just being unhealthy, being sedentary. But we'd rather pay a chiropractor to fix our back because we sit down like a sloth all day and don't do anything, rather than we would go for a walk or learn to strengthen our muscles ourselves. So you can't please everybody.
No. And you can see it like to a major degree on social media. Like the amount of times I've posted a picture when I was lean or something, and I have like half a dozen comments of like, oh, you're in great shape, that looks really good, and another half of comments being like, oh, that's disgusting, like I can see your veins, I can see all that. And like people have different different opinions on different like levels of leanness or the way things are. Like you could, what pleases one person isn't going to please another, and like there's no point trying, because you'll just burn yourself out trying to please other people. Just work to improve yourself, work on your goals and what you want, what you enjoy, and those things will change over time. But just acknowledging that and feeling happy within yourself and what it is that you want at that moment in time.
Yeah.
And that's all that really matters.
And on the bit where this person has asked, but when people are critical when you don't achieve, I think in the same vein, if they're not supporting you or cheering you on or offering constructive criticism, then potentially at a very strong end of the spectrum, reevaluate their place in your life. Because why do you want to be constantly surrounding yourself with people who aren't supportive of you?
Yeah.
I like to think I'm a very supportive friend. I will encourage my friends to do all sorts, except for my best friend to get yet more lip filler in because she looks beautiful. And we've had this morning. I think I want some more. I'm like, no, babe, you don't need any more. I'm not being friends with a fish. But you need some friends that will call you out when you're being a bit of a dick. And I had quite a frank conversation with one of my best friends the other day who expressed that when in about 2014-15 I was kind of at my smallest. She was like, we were all actually quite worried about you. I'm quite grateful that they didn't talk to me. I wouldn't have listened, to be honest, then. But they can now express that and we can have quite an adult conversation about things. But your friends don't always need to agree with you, but they need to know when to support you and maybe when to have frank and honest conversations whilst being compassionate and thoughtful of your feelings. But you'll be achieving things day in, day out. And if it's just not one person's measure of success, sometimes you've got to just be content with your path, focused on what you want to achieve, and kind of have blinkers on to everybody else.
As long as you feel good.
Yeah. And if I listen to every single person that told me, oh, don't lift that, or, oh, are you sure that's okay for you? Or, oh, don't get too muscly. I probably wouldn't still be doing this job, because everybody loves to have an opinion. And that's because actually a lot of the population don't understand that the gym is more than steroids and bodybuilders.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot more than that, but they allow their projection of the fact that they're nervous about the gym or they're scared of the gym or they don't like exercise to be pushed onto you.
Yeah, very well put, I think.
Thank you. That was rare for me.
Completely agree.
Oh, I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
And there's more for part 2. There's actually loads more.
There's cool. We'll get them done. Part 2. Plenty more questions.
All right. Thanks for that.
Perfect.